How many people are familiar with the Hydroplate theory? You're familiar? Who's not familiar with it? Who doesn't know much about the hands? Boy, it must be 80%. Well, you're in for a treat. This has had the biggest impact on me. There's a video out there by Kent Hovind that he connected the dots when I saw his first video. And then Walt Brown colored it in when I listened to, my gravity is working, his Hydroplate theory. He's interviewed on this, and it just colored in all the details, and the world makes sense to me. And so we're going to give you a basic understanding of this theory. This is how thick the theory is. It explains 25 major features on Earth and in the solar system, and it makes predictions, 50-some. And we're going to go through the predictions, and some of them have been confirmed, and they're just astounding. And so, yeah, so we can dive in right now, or we can take a little detour if you guys want to know about what I do and why I do it. Who wants to dive right in? Who wants to know what I do? Why? Oh boy, look at that. All right, okay. Well, I'm Brian Lauer from St. Cloud, Minnesota, and I've got a ministry called Solidify Your Faith, where I help people solidify their faith in the Bible by looking at science. Because there's so much evidence that points to a creator and a worldwide flood, but it's being censored or misinterpreted, and the results are devastating. Just look at our culture. Is our culture getting more and more lawless? And that's because we're becoming more and more godless. And why is that? Well, studies show that 67 to 90% of the kids that go to church are going to stop going to church when they leave home. And the main reason is they don't believe the Bible's true, and they start to doubt the Bible in junior high and high school. And not coincidentally, that's when they're being taught evolution and the Big Bang. And it's being taught as dogma. You can't question it. So in an effort to fight that indoctrination, I've given talks from here to Florida at churches, schools, colleges, clubs, wherever the doors open. And you can pray about this one. I met a pastor from St. Louis last week, and he's got a couple of kids who teach at Christian colleges. And so he asked for my resume. It's like, oh boy. So I got that freshened up, and I contacted some people, get it? And one of them was a former president of a state college, and she was happy to be my reference. A president of a state college, I couldn't believe it. And so God's got a sense of humor, because most state campuses I'm on, I'm not quite the most popular guy. But so we give some of those talks, and some of those talks can be seen on my YouTube channel, especially when the atheist club shows up. All right? Those are fun, a lot of fun. There was a couple of times when an atheist just yelled and stormed out of the room. It's like, was it something I said? Apparently, he didn't like seeing his belief system crumble right before his eyes. And there was one of the times, it was during Q&A, and someone asks, well, how do you think life began? I said, God made us. He goes, miracles, miracles, you believe in miracles? And he starts storming out of the room. And I said, hey, everybody believes in miracles. I believe God created us, and you believe hydrogen and helium turn into people. They're both miracles. The problem that he has is he doesn't have a miracle maker. And so I've spent a lot of time on campus, talked to a lot of students, and I'm looking for kids who want a diversity of thought on campus. And what I find, I help them start Bible clubs or creation science clubs. And it takes a little effort, but it's worth it, because then we have access to the college, the rooms and the theaters and everything. And now my main goal is to help people start creation clubs in every community in the country. And it's easier than you think, okay? All we need is somebody who cares, and then a place to meet, or show a movie or something. And so that's my goal now. We'll talk about that at the end a little bit. But you might be asking, well, Brian, why are you so adamant about showing these about creation? Well, there's 3 reasons. Number 3 is it's had a huge impact on my life. It really solidified my faith and made me realize the Bible is not just a Sunday book. It's for every day. It's for every area, even science. And the second reason is I believe everybody should have an opportunity to think. Does anybody disagree with that? Zuckerberg probably doesn't. We see a lot of censorship going on. But to think, you need to see both sides of an issue, right? Is that happening in our government schools, museums, and media? Not a chance. Not when it comes to the origin of the universe and the origin of people. The only perspective they allow is godless materialism for the Big Bang and evolution, which is absurd. I mean, when's the last time you popped the hood on your car and you looked up to check the oil and you thought, boy, I wonder how many millions of years it took for that engine to evolve, right? People think you're crazy. Yeah, but and what's the dead giveaway for intelligent design? How about multiple parts working together with precision timing for a purpose? Well, guess what, folks? Multiple parts working together with precision timing for a purpose. And if you could see what's happening inside your cells right now, it would blow your mind how many multiple parts are working together. So we're clearly designed, obviously designed, and yet that idea is not tolerated in our government schools. It's being censored. I think there's a lot of people that have a lot of pride and a lot of money and a lot of prestige tied up with evolution. They don't want it to fall apart, you know, so they're doing what they can to censor this idea, because if we get a fair shake, we win. They just won't give us a fair shake. So with that in mind, I'm going to submit to you the Hydroplane Theory. Okay, Hydroplate. And this is getting censored too, by people that you wouldn't think would be censoring. But the Hydroplate, it was developed by Dr. Walt Brown. He was graduated from West Point. He's a go-getter, Army Ranger, paratrooper. Got his PhD from MIT in mechanical engineering. And he was a colonel in the Army, taught at the Air Force Academy, and ran the Benin military lab that had hundreds of scientists and dozens of PhDs, and he's the top dog. So he's a brilliant man, he's got brilliant friends, and I think of him as today's Isaac Newton. We're going to look back on him. He's not getting the respect he deserves. But after he's dead, I think that we're going to really be thankful for his ideas. And 40-some years ago in the 1970s, he's driving through South Dakota, and he hears on the radio that somebody found Noah's Ark on a mountain. And he's an evolutionist, and he thought, an ark on a mountain? Yeah, right. Well, you know, if there was an ark on a mountain, that would mean everything below that ark was covered with water, right? Well, that would mean there was a worldwide flood. You know, and that would mean a whole bunch of plants and animals got buried in mud and turned into fossils. He thought, wait a minute. If the fossils are evidence for a flood, where's the evidence for evolution? And he began to study it out and ask his brilliant colleagues, you know, what evidence is there for evolution? And after 2 years, he didn't find any evidence. And he became a creationist, and he developed the Hydroplate theory. So now most theories, they begin with what we have and try and figure out how we got it. They look at the effects, which are known, and try and figure out the cause, which is unknown. This is different. Walt Brown sets up the cause with only one assumption and lets the laws of physics go at it and determine the effects, which match perfectly with what we have today. And so that one assumption, and it's a biblical assumption, one assumption is half of the ocean, half of the water in the ocean was inside the earth at one time, 60 miles deep. There's a layer of water. Okay, so just think of the earth as a big apple. The skin is 60 miles thick, made of granite. Underneath that, there's a layer of water, roughly a mile thick, and underneath that, there's basalt. Okay, and the granite and the basalt are touching each other at various places around the world. Okay, so far, that's one assumption. And a few weeks ago, I talked to a professor at a state college about this. And she had this book for 8 months, and we spent an hour and a half talking about it. And she said that if that assumption is true, what I'm going to tell you right now, it works. This is a valid theory if that assumption is true. She just didn't believe the assumption was true. Okay, so this works scientifically. And so that's the one assumption, and we have to throw in, just imagine the moon, okay? This is the moon out here. We're going to let the laws of physics go at it. The moon's gravity pulls on the earth, and it causes tides, high tide and low tide, twice a day, right? Well, it also tugs on the crust of the earth. And back then, you know, before the flood, it wasn't broken into plates like it is today. It just was the crust, one solid unit. So it would stretch and compress, stretch and compress, stretch and compress, stretch and compress, and that generates heat. It's like if I had a wire up here and I bend it back and forth, it's going to get warm. I keep doing it, it's going to break. That's why your electric cords, you shouldn't always wrap it up real tight because it keeps bending on the same place and that place gets weak. Anyway, that was pretty. It'll make your vacuum cleaner last longer though. So it's generating heat. And the heat has to go somewhere, so it goes into the water in the subterranean water chambers. And that water gets hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter and wants to boil, but it can't because there's no room to expand. And at 705 degrees, at 3,200 psi, pounds per square inch, it becomes what's known as supercritical water. where it's not really water and it's not really steam, but whatever it is, it dissolves things like crazy. So it's dissolving the granite above, and it's dissolving the basalt below, and it's making these minerals in the water, like limestone and quartz and salts. It's making all this stuff in limestone. When that forms, it makes carbon dioxide. Okay, what's frozen carbon dioxide called? Anybody know? Dry ice. Very good. Yeah, dry ice. And that quartz is a cementing agent. Okay, that'll be important later. Okay, so it's getting hotter and hotter, and the crust is getting weaker and weaker, and the pressure is increasing. So it is stretch and compress, hotter and hotter, weaker and weaker, more and more pressure. Now the water's up to 372,000 psi. It's just waiting to explode out of there. Something's got to give. And the Bible tells us what happened and when. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. This is when the crust of the earth cracked, and it just erupted. I mean, there's hardly any psi at the surface, and it just exploded out of there. And so the earth cracked, the crust of the earth cracked, and it went in two directions at 3 miles per second. So in 2 hours, it circumnavigated the globe, and it just erupted out of there. Walt Brown says it had the force of trillions of hydrogen bombs. And then the water shot up into the air, and that's how it could rain for 40 days and 40 nights. And then eventually the water got so high that it didn't get up into the air anymore, and it continued to rise another 110 days. So that's how it could happen. And you're thinking, well, wait a minute, Brian, come on now. If this happened, wouldn't it leave a mark on the earth? The answer is yes, and it did. That's the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. That's a mountain range that goes around the mid-oceanic ridge, and every ocean has something like this. It's a mountain range, 46,000 miles long. And when you zoom in on it, you see it's got straight cracks on it. Straight crack is a sign of a tension crack. That rock was getting pulled, and then it released pressure, and it just made a straight crack. Now notice there's some that are going side to side, and some that are going up and down. So this mountain range, made of basalt, was formed by stretching it in two directions. How in the world do you form a mountain range 46,000 miles long by stretching it in two directions? This is the Indian Ocean. And if you notice that line that goes straight up and down on the right side there, that's a ridge, the 90 East Ridge, and it's 3,000 miles long, and it points directly at the Himalayas. We'll explain why that is. Okay, and then this is the Pacific Ocean. Notice how different that is than the rest of the oceans. It's a whole lot deeper. It's got 40,000 volcanoes down there. It's got the deepest place on Earth, Mariana Trench, 36,000 feet. And yet on the right side, there's that mid-oceanic ridge again. So something really weird happened in the Pacific Ocean. Another question, where did the sediment come from that's on the continents? The continents have roughly a mile of sediment, and a lot of it's turned into sedimentary rock. One, where did the sediment come from? And two, how come it turned to rock? Well, that brings us back to the crack. Where did the sediment come from? It came from whatever's around the mid-oceanic ridge, the fountains of the Great Deep. Because when that earth cracked, the crust cracked, now you've got two cliffs 60 miles high. And on Earth, you can only have a cliff 5 miles high because the weight of the rock will crush the rock below. And you got 60-mile cliffs that are crumbling into this explosive flow of water. And when you have the ratio for sedimentary rock that doesn't have limestone, or it doesn't have carbon in it, such as limestone, the ratio is 65 parts granite, 35 parts basalt. Okay, where's that coming from? It's coming from the fountains of the Great Deep. The basalt and the granite are coming in, and then there's more granite going out on the way up. So it's crumbling in, the fountains of the Great Deep are putting them out on the continents. Okay, well, how come it turned into rock? Well, remember quartz, the cementing agent? Mystery solved. Yeah, this is the mid-oceanic ridge, if you look at it all at once. He thinks it started up by Alaska and went around, and then it ended where that circle is. And once it came together, it stopped splitting. And then the water just gushed out like crazy. Okay, so now you've got two cliffs that are eroding away. They're just getting farther and farther and farther apart, which means there's less weight pushing down on the mantle. And eventually, the mantle bulges. Bulges up because there's nothing pushing it down. And then the continents start to slide. You know, if you had a freight train and two tracks and you raise one end of the track, it's going to start rolling. That's what's happening with the continents. They're starting to slide friction-free. So the gap gets wider. So then the mid-oceanic ridge bulges even higher. And it keeps going faster and faster, wider and wider. That mid-oceanic ridge is 800 miles wide on average. That's from here to St. Louis. So it's bulging and the continents are sliding. And if that train runs into a cliff, it's going to buckle like crazy. Like, look at North America and South America. They're going to the west. You got Africa and Europe going to the east. And they're going to keep going friction-free until they run into resistance, like another plate or run out of water. So they're sliding. And like my elbow stops, this is going to keep going and it's going to buckle like crazy. And that's how we form the mountains. That's why the major mountain ranges are parallel to the mid-oceanic ridge. Okay, so now you got mountains with a big mass on a small base. They're going to sink down. If something's sinking down, something's got to rise up. That's the plateaus. Most major mountain ranges have plateaus next to them, rising up. Similarly, the mid-oceanic ridge, that 46,000-mile ridge, that's rising up. Something has to sink in. What sinks in? It's the Pacific Ocean. Yeah, the Pacific Ocean, the ring of fire, sinks in. And that's why the deepest trench, that's why there's a lot of trenches there. The deepest part, like I mentioned, Mariana Trench, is there. There's even a whole continent that's sunk in. Look at that red box. You see that kind of swirl down and then it goes up, kind of like a 7, it goes down? See it on the top of this? Swirls down, goes up, and comes down. The whole continent sunk down. And there's land animals there. So what's happened? The ocean just got deeper. The Pacific Ocean is a lot deeper than the rest of the oceans. It got deeper, so the water starts flowing into the ocean, into the Pacific Ocean, and running off from the continents, which were covered with water. And it cuts the canyons, not Grand Canyon, not yet, that's a whole other talk. But it cuts the canyons in the continental shelf. You know, you got the beach, and then you got the shelf, and then the slope, and it drops off. There's big canyons at the end of like the Ganges, the Amazon, the Congo. There's huge canyons in that continental shelf that can't form if it's underwater. So that tells us the continents were higher when the water was running off, and then eventually the continents sunk down, the oceans rose up and buried those canyons in water. Greenland has a huge canyon, longer than Grand Canyon, and it puzzles people because it's not that big. It shouldn't have that much water. And it's underneath 2 kilometers of ice. How's that happen? And then in Antarctica, we've got liquid lakes under 2 miles of ice. How does that happen? Especially in Antarctica, where the average summer temp is below freezing. Well, after the flood, you know, everything that could hold water was holding water, and then the ice age comes. In Greenland, the water goes off, cuts the canyon, and then the ice age fills it up. And so how do we get an ice age? It's really, evolutionists have a hard time with that. They got like 40 theories, none of them work. Because to have an ice age, you need warmer winters and cooler summers. You need warmer winters so the air is warmer and can carry more moisture onto the continents and come down as snow. And yet you need cooler summers because if it all melts, there's no ice age. An ice age is just snow is more than it melts year after year after year. So how does this happen? Well, after the flood, the oceans were warmer. Therefore, more moisture going up onto the continents. Well, how come the snow didn't melt? Well, the continents were higher, therefore cooler. Plus, a lot of volcanoes were going off, so there's a lot more particles in the atmosphere, and the sun's heat can't reach the surface. Okay, and so it's cooler. So you got 500 years of snowing more than it melts, and during that time, the ocean is cooling off, so it's not as much evaporation. And so you got 500 years, you get the ice age, and you got glaciers everywhere on the North Pole and the South Pole, except for, wait for it, parts of Alaska. Parts of Siberia do not have a glacier in the ice age. It's like, well, how does that happen? How does something that has permafrost today not have a glacier during the ice age? Well, it's because it was close to the ocean. It had the water was coming down as rain, and then when it got into the higher elevations, it came down as snow. Okay, so you got 500 years to build it up, and a couple hundred years for the ocean to cool off, the continents to settle down, get warmer, also the atmosphere to clear up, so now you get more of the sun hitting the earth, and it takes a couple hundred years for that ice to melt. And to a certain extent, we're still recovering from that ice age. Don't buy that climate change and global warming stuff. You know, the thing that they aren't telling you is carbon dioxide is plant food. The more CO2 we have in the atmosphere, the more food we're going to get, the less droughts we're going to have, and the less fires we're going to have. I highly recommend this book, Inconvenient Facts. This explains it all. This guy says, the people who are alarmed about that CO2, it's like they're freaking out over their gas tank overflowing when it's an eighth full. Because we've got 400 parts per million in the CO2 right now, we've had 6,000 to 8,000 parts per million in the past. It's not a big deal. And there's also a good website called co2science.org where you can see just how much more food we'd have if we had more CO2. But anyway, back to the flood. Down in Antarctica, they find evidence of crocodiles, dinosaurs, palm trees. How in the world is that going to live down there? Even if it is warmer, how are you going to get a palm tree to grow in the dark 4 months of the year? And on top of the Earth, in the Arctic Circle, they find stuff like badgers. They can't live in permafrost. And redwood trees with the stumps are 10 feet across. Okay, how does that grow up there when it's dark 10 months of the year? Okay, or 4 months of the year, I should say. And then they also find mammoths frozen in the permafrost. Mammoths, by the millions. They figure there was 5 million mammoths up there. And mammoths, contrary to popular belief, are not Arctic animals. Okay? They eat too much, they drink too much. There's no way they're going to survive up there. I mean, our inch nose gets cold in the winter. Can you imagine if that was 6 feet long? How much heat would dissipate off of there? And then they found something. This is a hint. They found a mammoth, not a French mammoth. But they found a mammoth standing up. What's that mammoth doing? It was standing up. They found a mammoth frozen in permafrost standing up. They analyzed it and they said, yep, it's a mammoth. And now it's in the St. Petersburg Museum. And it had identifiable food in its stomach. It had food in its mouth. It had seeds of buttercups. It's got summer food. Any hunters out here? Any hunters? What's the first thing you do when you shoot a deer? You gotta take the, otherwise it's gonna keep on dissolving, it's gonna generate heat, it's gonna spoil the meat. Well, this mammoth, can you imagine how much heat is in the stomach of a mammoth? It flash froze. Once it was frozen, it didn't keep digesting it, they could still identify it. They figured it had to be 150 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit to flash freeze it. Okay, so how does that happen? Well, Walt Brown says some of that fountains of the great deep were going up with such force that it went up into the atmosphere, escaped our atmosphere, it got up into outer space. It got really cold. Remember that carbon dioxide? What's that called? Dry ice. Yeah, and it's going to be muddy hail comes down on it. They call it the big hail. So you got stuff super cold coming crashing down on these mammoths, and they bury them in ice. Okay, buried in ice, I don't know how thick, and then the flood comes and it's over the mammoths. And then now they're starting to thaw out, you know. But you freeze a temperate animal in a temperate environment, how come it doesn't thaw out? That brings us to the big roll. Okay, now the mountains on the north are pretty much canceled out by the mountains on the south, except for the Himalayas. Remember, you find the Himalayas by looking for that 90 East Ridge, wherever that is, that straight line going up right here. The straight line going up, 3,000-mile ridge points directly to the Himalayas. Well, how did that happen? Well, the equator, it bulges. It's 26, the diameter is 26 miles farther than the pole to pole. So there's a little bulge there. Okay, why is that important? Well, the Himalayas, just think of the Himalayas were up here. Just think of that red dot as the Himalayas. There's a whole bunch of mass on top of the Earth, and it's trying to get to the equator. So it's making the whole world roll. Like if we had a top that was spinning and put some glue on it, it's going to try and get to the outside, and it's going to bring the top with it. And it was on top, and now it's on the side, which means what was on the side is now on the top. So Mammothville, temperate climate on the side, once it rolls, now it's Mammoth chill. And that's why it got frozen, and that's why they didn't thaw out. And that's why, this is where Antarctica was before the roll. Parts of it are tropical. That's why you can get palm trees and alligators and dinosaurs in the South Pole. Okay, so it's a neat theory, but can you validate it? And the answer is yes, with predictions. See, Walt Brown says some of that stuff was exploding there at over 7 miles per second. You need 7. So not only did it break through our atmosphere, it broke through our gravitational pull. And he says some of this stuff is going 32 miles per second. Now a bullet's going about 0.6, just for scale. Just shooting out with tremendous force. And so they escape our gravity. So now the bigger rocks, they're the only game in town as far as gravity goes. So the bigger ones are going to start to collect the little ones. And there's a lot of water up there, a lot of dry ice up there, a lot of mud up there. So you get these dirty snowballs flying around you. What has been described as a dirty snowball? What? I heard it. Comet. Yeah, comets are flying around. And Walt Brown predicted when we find out what's in a comet, we're going to find things from Earth, like olivine. And he was right. And he also predicted that when we find out what comets, what asteroids are, and we'll look at this a little later, we're going to find that they're floating rock piles made of rounded boulders. How in the world do you get rounded boulders in space? You know, if there's collisions out there, it's going to be sharp edges. The only way you get a rounded boulder is if they're going through a powerful flow of water, breaking off the edges before they get shot into space. Okay, and so then if they're going at the same speed, the same velocity, you could capture a moon doing that. Capturing a moon is very difficult. And they can't even explain our moon. They got 4 theories, none of them work. And to catch a moon on an asteroid just boggles them. It's like that shouldn't happen by their theory, but their theory's wrong. Okay, so is there any evidence that this happened? If they were shooting up like crazy, would it leave a mark on the moon? Yes and yes. The near side of the moon has been pounded. There's a lot more lava flows, there's a lot more moonquakes, and the far side, it's still solid. It's peppered, but it's not nearly as beat up. So when you look at it, those red things are high density things. So it looks like, and notice they're on the Earth side, not the far side. And it looks like the moon has been shot by buckshot. And so this theory explains a lot of stuff. And he's got 50-some theories, or 50-some predictions. Now, this is the 8th edition. You can see the 9th edition online. But what you can't see online are the validated ones. It's bold. These are the ones that are confirmed. But if you go in and look at them online, they're not bold. So I emailed him and I said, can you maybe put an asterisk by it or something because it's not working? And he said, yeah, we're having trouble with our software. So there's some technical difficulties behind this. But we'll just quickly look at the ones that he got right, and then we'll look into them a little deeper. He predicted cold water under mountains, which is right. Deep channels under Bosporus and Gibraltar. Salt on Mars. Asteroids are flying rock piles. Rocks and asteroids, not asteroids and comets, will be rounded. Water inside large asteroids. And carbon-14 in old bones. And those were all right. So you got 6 of them right. You got the bottom one, you got wrong. Spin rate and direction of that series. That's the big asteroid between Mars and Jupiter. Okay, so comet chasers get mineral shock. Remember he said you're going to find stuff on Earth? Mineral shock. What are they so upset about or shocked about? Many of the compounds that they found in this Stardust mission, they spent $200 million to go up there and figure out, actually bring back particles that were in the comet tail. Many of the compounds could only have been formed close to the star. Where do they say that comets come from? They have this Oort cloud. 50,000 astronomical units from here to sun. 50,000 of them away is where they say comets come from. And yet they're saying, no, it came from close to a star. Well, why did it have to be close to the star? Because of water. You have to have liquid water. This is from the Deep Impact mission. They found crystalline silicates that could not form in frigid outer space unless the temperature reached 1,300 degrees Fahrenheit. Plus minerals that apparently form only in liquid water, like limestone and clays. They find that in comets. Where's liquid water in the universe, in the solar system? On the surface, it's just Earth. If it's too close to the sun, it's steam. If it's too far from the sun, it's ice. And this is formed in liquid water. The dust was crystalline and contained abundant organics, even the amino acid glycine. Water molecules, many chemical elements common on Earth, but compared to hydrogen and helium, rare in space. Then it goes on to say, crystalline material, minerals should not form in the cold weightnesses of outer space. And then it says, it was announced that Wild 2 contained the mineral cubanite that forms only in the presence of scalding hot water. Remember when we talked about hot water that couldn't boil? That falls to the great deep? That's where this stuff is getting made. And it got shot up into outer space, and it's part of the comets now. And again, Kevin Lee was there, Dr. Brownlee, Don Brownlee, I think. He read Walt Brown's predictions, what they're going to find in a comet. And he makes some totally other predictions, because he thinks they're coming from outer space, 50,000 units away. Walt Brown's saying, no, it's coming from Earth. And Kevin Lee was at the University of Washington when Dr. Brownlee was presenting his Stardust mission findings. And Kevin Lee asked him, did you find any amino acids? And Dr. Brownlee didn't answer it. and Kevin Lee, and you can hear all this stuff on this, I'm telling you, this would be a great Christmas present. All this stuff, you can hear him describing what's happening. And he talked to Dr. Brownlee afterwards, and he says, the evidence shows that it came from the Earth, but the problem you have is you don't have any mechanism to get it up there. And he said, this book gives you the mechanism. He said, just read it under your covers at night as a professional courtesy. And so, whether he did or not, but just it's really interesting listening to these guys talk in an interview. Okay, let's go through some of the confirmed predictions. Spacecraft landing on comets' nucleus will find that comets and bodies hit by comets, such as Mars, contain lures, salt, bacteria, and traces of vegetation. So what do we find on the comets? We find water, salts, silicates, crystalline silicates, limestone, which only forms in liquid water, remember? Clay, cubonite, olivine, iron, nickel, organics, amino acids, and bacteria and cellulose. That's what plants are made out of. So when you hear that they find bacteria on Earth, on Mars, they say, yeah, well, Brown predicted that. And there was a headline. I go into Facebook media, the Star Tribune or wherever on Facebook, and there was something that they think they found life on Venus. And I said, well, if there's life on Venus, it probably came from Earth. And then I linked them to a hydroplane theory, so they can think for themselves. Okay, they also predicted that asteroids are rock piles, often with internal ice acting as a weak glue. Large rocks that began the capture process are near the center of asteroids, and it was confirmed. The series was found that it does indeed have a density rock core. And then it's got water vapor escaping out of it. That can't go on for millions of years. That thing is young. Okay, and then let's take a look at these peanut-shaped things out there. And listen to what they say. It's a major mystery how two objects, each the size of skyscrapers, could collide without blowing each other into smithereens. This is especially puzzling in a region of the solar system where gravitational forces would normally involve collision speeds of 4,500 miles per hour. These things were going at the same force, the same velocity, and they gently came together. That's how you get a peanut-shaped one. What they're saying is, no, they should, their theory doesn't work. Because what happens in outer space, does anybody play pool? Anybody play pool? Do those balls stick together or do they bounce apart? They bounce apart. That's what happens. The rings on Saturn are not forming moons. The asteroid belt is not forming planets. Their theory is just falling apart. It says so in the science journals, but in their textbooks in high school, it doesn't say that. And I've done a talk what's wrong with our textbooks. So the way you can tell the 8th edition from the 9th edition is how deep the subterranean waters are. This is 10 miles deep. This is what it says. In the 9th edition, it says 60 miles deep. And I think he did that so he can allow enough material to make the asteroids. And so more predictions. Most of the rocks, pebble-sized and larger, comprising asteroids and comets, will be found rounded to some degree. And that's what they found. Found boulders 1 to 3 meters in diameter, stacked layer upon layer, and they're rounded. They found it in comet 67P. And it's puzzling to them. Comet close-up reveals world of surprises. That's the top left. The bottom right says, dinosaur egg spotted on Rosetta's comet. Right? There's no way, they can't explain it. But Walt Brown, it just fits hand in glove. Another prediction, a deep penetrating impact on a large asteroid such as Sirius will release huge volumes of water, and that's been confirmed. Soil erosion channels in Mars will contain traces of Earth-like soluble compounds such as salt from Earth's pre-flood chambers. Soil far from erosion channels will not, and they found salt on Mars. And so I'm just going to go through these predictions, so when you see it on the news, oh yeah, Walt Brown said that. Beneath major mountains are large volumes of pooled water, and that's what they found, supercritical water below the Tibetan Plateau. They also find salty water in cracks 5 to 10 miles below the surface. And water shouldn't be able to seep down that far. They get just sealed off with all that weight. And that's been confirmed, I believe. The crystalline rock under Gibraltar, the Bosporus, and the Dardanelles, the Golden Gate Bridge will be found to be eroded into V-shapes, and that's been confirmed. Bones and other remains that contain enough carbon are believed to be older 100,000 years will be shown to be relatively young. And that's been confirmed. They find carbon-14 in dinosaur bones. Yeah, but they won't let them talk about it. These guys, they submitted it at the 2012 Geophysics Symposium in Singapore. That was their study. They found that dinosaur bones were 27 to 39,000 years old. And the people who put on the theory, the thing, they won't let them talk about it like they're supposed to. You know, this is the method that we did. This is what we followed. The people who put that together, they took it down. They censored it because they didn't agree with the results. So there's censorship going on, like we talked about. Okay, now there's this predictions for outer space. He predicts the Oort cloud will never be detected because it does not exist. And if I was a betting man, I'd bet on that. Okay, and corings into the basement rock on the Moon and Mars and other rocky planets will find little radioactivity because he believes that the radioactive elements in the Earth were formed during the flood, when the granite was buckling up and down and slamming together. That's a whole other talk, though. Bacteria will be found on Mars. Their DNA will be similar to Earth's bacteria. So when they find life on Mars, guess what? It came from Earth. Many TNOs, that's trans-Neptune objects, that's way out there in the solar system, will be found with rings. Some large parabolic comets, as they fall toward the center of the solar system for the first time, will have moons. That's a prediction. It'll be interesting to see. Comet ice that has never melted will contain CO2. Most rocks comprising asteroids will be found to be magnetized. Rocks and asteroids are typical of Earth's crust. Expensive efforts to mine asteroids to recover strategic or precious metals will be a waste of money. He predicts a greater concentration of argon will be found in the outer portions of comets. And he makes predictions like, I don't know why. Some of this go way over my head. Water ice on asteroids will be rich in deuterium. Mars' smaller ruin Deimos will also be found to be have a very low density. Asteroids spinning faster than 10 rotations per day will be found to be single, well-rounded rocks. That's because if it's spinning and something tries to land on it, could get pushed off again. Planet X will not be found in the next 5 years, so they got 2 or 3 months to find it before this prediction, because it does not exist. No incoming comets will ever be seen on a hyperbolic orbit because cometary material came from Earth as the flood began, not from outside the solar system. Fragments of a 60-mile granite layer will be found a few miles under the Pacific floor inside the Ring of Fire. Well, it's pretty close with this. It's not quite under the floor, but it's close. That was Zealandia, by the way, that continent that sunk. The 346 whales fossilized in Peru. Have you heard about that? And plus the 80 fossilized whales found in Chile. I think those are like 2 miles above the sea level. And they all just finally got how they have to do some very imaginative storytelling to get all them to fossilize. And they'll never say a worldwide flood. You know, they'll never say that, the secularists anyway. They're just the tip of the iceberg. Similar fossil graveyards will be found along the western base of the Andes and Rocky Mountains. In 1976, an 80-foot-long baleen whale fossilized in diatomaceous earth was found in Lompoc, California, standing vertically on its tail. You think it just stood there for millions of years waiting to fill in? You know, it just doesn't make sense. One should not find marine, oh, this one, pay attention to this one. This has to do with the mammoths. He says, we'll never find marine fossils, layered strata, oils, coal seams, or limestone directly beneath undisturbed rock ice or frozen mammoth carcasses. Because what he's saying is all that stuff, coal, fossils, limestone, and strata, that formed during the flood. And he said the mammoths were on the ground during the flood, so you'll never find any of that underneath them. And so far he's been right. They find some fossils close to them, but it's never underneath them. Okay, now these are slot canyons. He predicts that there will be, the cracks will keep on going down, and there's going to be cobbles and sediments will be found miles below the floor of the slot canyons. Because really, how did those canyons form? Well, we do another talk on that. And I'd go into a lot more detail in another talk called Noah, What Caused the Flood. Excessive heavy hydrogen will be found in salty water pockets 5 or more miles below the Earth's surface. Fossils of land animals, not just shallow water plant fossils, will be found in and near the trenches. In the trenches, Mariana Trench, that's 36,000 feet deep. And he's predicting, yeah, we might find some land animals close to that. So he's going on, he's making some astounding predictions, but his astounding predictions tend to come true, especially when it comes to comets. The inner gorge is a tension crack that has to do with the Grand Canyon, and that it'll be V-shaped, and I think they're getting close to confirming that. The soil chemistry in the basins that held Grand Lake and Hopi Lakes, that has to do with Grand Canyon also, will be found to be distinctly different than that from their surroundings. Okay, a chemical and isotope analysis of the sand dunes in California will show that the sand came from Grand Canyon. How are you going to get all that dirt over there? Well, he explains it. High concentrations of Lurs particles will be found at the bottom of several hundred feet of most ice cores drilled in Antarctica and Greenland. Lurs is a really weird type of soil. Most soil is kind of rounded. This is real jagged, flat and jagged. So I'm thinking this is what exploded right away and then came down on the Earth. Okay, blind radiocarbon dating of different parts of the same mammoth will continue to give different ages for the radiocarbon. General circulation models of the Earth's weather will be able to demonstrate an ice age would have occurred if warm oceans, vast flood basalts, and high cold continents once existed. All right. Rock ice will be found to be salty. Measuring the inner core of the Earth, it's going to be slower when compared to the rest of the Earth. And a well-designed blind test will not support the ages of the Hawaiian Islands, the volcanoes. Magnetic intensity above black smokers. Now, black smokers is, I talk to people about this, they think, well, I don't believe water was inside the Earth. I don't believe there's water under the oceans. And I said, why not? There's water under the oceans now. They didn't find it until 1977, and yet Job writes about it, the springs of the sea, thousands of years ago. And this is super hot water coming from underneath the ocean. I think it's still part of the fountains of the Great Deep. Okay, and so the magnetic intensity above the black smoker slowly increases because the rock below, fractured since the flood a few thousand years ago, is cooling. Bubbles in rock ice will be found to contain less air and much more carbon dioxide than normally found in ice bubbles formed today. That's because of the CO2 in the fountains of the Great Deep. By 2020, satellites in low orbits will predict the locations of major earthquakes several days before the quake. So we made this roughly 13 years ago, and they're getting pretty close. They understand that during an earthquake, there's like lightning in the ground. See, granite's made of quartz, feldspar, mica, and something else, hornblende. But quartz, which makes up 20% of it, 27%, if you squish it or stretch it, it sparks. That's what that could light an electric grill. You push that button, the spring hits it, hits a cord, it sparks. Okay, but if you get big slabs, 60 miles thick, slamming up and down as the water's coming apart and bending back and forth, and he says it slams those particles together and makes radioactive activity. And you're going to be able to tell before the earthquake comes based on the electrons or whatever. And when you think about it, if God said it was very good, is uranium very good? Radioactive material that can cause birth defects, is that very good? So he's thinking, that didn't exist before the flood. Okay, let's see. My suggestion is, get this, Hydroplate Theory. Go into rsr.org. It's a great gift. You can listen to it live. You can just go into rsr.org, type in Walt Brown, and listen to the shows. But I encourage you to buy it. Give it to somebody. Let them listen to it. And support the ministry, too. But they're having technical difficulties with that, too. So when you go into rsr.org, go into their store, you're going to have to search Hydroplate to find this. You won't see it for some reason. And then the Hydroplate Theory tutorial, that's Brian Nichols. He animates this. If you're a visual learner, oh my, get that, the Hydroplate Theory. And it just makes it come alive. I get such an understanding. And he does the same thing for the origin of Grand Canyon. I've watched a lot of videos, I've read a lot of books about Grand Canyon, but this by far gives me I understand it so much better. So much better. And then also Mission Imperative, the Grand Canyon, the puzzle on the plateau, where it talks about Zion Canyon, Bryce Canyon, Monument Valley, the Painted Forest, and all these other things in that area. And they all have something to do with those lakes that breach to make Grand Canyon. And so these are the two creation ministries that I know of that support in the beginning. Just two. The big ones aren't, for whatever reason. And so maybe there's pride and prestige, maybe there's integrity that's involved in that. But anyhow, if you want, this is the 8th edition, okay? If you want to see the 9th edition, go into hpt.rsr.org. I mean, you can go into Walt Brown's site, creationscience.com, and you can see a PDF of it, but it's very cumbersome. But if you go into hpt.rsr.org, RSR stands for Real Science Radio, by the way, and then go in there and then look at the flip book. You click on the flip book, and you got the thing. You go over to the index, and that's what I did. I just went over there and said, confirm predictions of the Hydroplane Theory, and I clicked on that number, and it brought me right to it. So then I click on that number, and it lets me read about it. And then I just push return, and it goes back to here, because it's on page 480. You know, if I click somewhere and I touch it, now it's a different page and I have to type in 480. But this is a really good tool if you want to learn about this. And again, we've just touched this. We're just scratching the surface on this. You're getting a working understanding of the hydroplane theory. It's available if you want to learn more. I'm just cracking the door open to you. It's up to you to kick it down. And what I really like about this is there's a list of objections to the hydroplane theory. And they answer the objections. And what and at the bottom of that, if you go into RSR, Real Science Radio, and type in, hydroplate objections, it's going to bring you to this page. You scroll all the way down to the bottom, and you're going to see links. You can link to published critiques of this theory. So you're going to be able to see what the theory says, you're going to believe what the critics say about it, and it's published or online. And so you have all the information in one website to think for yourself. Wouldn't it be nice if the evolutionists did that? So we could critique their Big Bang, and they'd link it. They'd link the students. Link it to the evolution critique and the plate tectonics critique, or even the catastrophic plate tectonics. I challenge every educational system to do this. If you've got a theory out there, publish, link to the critiques of it. And but again, this theory's been around for decades, and hardly anybody knew about it, right? Why has it been suppressed? Well, that's another talk, and if you're interested in that, Jane Albright, she did a research on it, and she talked to all the scientists involved. She talked to Walt, she talked to other people. And if you're interested in that, why is it being suppressed? It's sad. It's really sad, because if we would have been pounding this theory, if this would have been common knowledge, man, every 5 or 10 years we'd have a confirmed prediction. We'd have so much scientific clout right now, because there's, 6 of them that were confirmed based on this theory. And we could go up to the evolutionists and say, well, what do you guys got? We got 6, how many do you got? And they would give us more respect, I think. If we're making accurate predictions, they might look at our stuff a little harder. And maybe maybe it would filter into the schools. You want to have junior high and high school kids walking away from the Bible, because this theory comes from the Bible, and we can go through the verses if we have time. Okay, and the thing that gives me the most hope of all is this came out this summer. It's from Creation Matters. It's from the Creation Research Society. So this is one of the mainline creation scientific journals. They did an article on the flood models, and they talked about the hydroplane theory. I was so excited. So excited. They gave it a fair write-up. So that tells me maybe, just maybe, the dam of censorship is breaking. So it's up to us to keep chipping away at that dam, getting this information and sharing it with people. Okay, and so that brings us to what can we do? This is the application part. If you want more information, I gave this talk, well, it's not this talk. This is just the overview. I gave a more detailed talk at St. Cloud State. You can see this online. It's Noah, what caused the flood. The sound is a little goofy, but the information is good. But that was only because we had a creation club. We had a club on campus. We had access to the rooms. And I'd like to get a club at Northland. If anybody knows any students that go there, I'd like to talk to them. And I was on the phone Thursday talking. I called up Northland and I said, hey, I said, do you guys allow somebody to have a table on campus so we can talk to students? And she said, well, tell me more. And I said, well, I'm a creationist, and we speak on Monday night, and I was just wondering if you allowed that kind of diversity of thought on campus. Diversity of thought. I mean, they all hang their hat on diversity and inclusiveness. It's like, how about this? And she said, yeah, we're for diversity, and we think people should have all ideas. And she knows, but she said it was pretty buttoned up with COVID. But she said, if COVID wasn't around, we'd be welcoming you with open arms. And so I'm pretty excited. If it ever loosens up, invite me back. I'd like to spend a few days there talking to the students, maybe even giving talks like this to their science class. And so, it's other things that we've done at St. Cloud State, and there's posters in the back on the way out if you want to see some of the stuff. This is the very first talk we gave at St. Cloud State. We weren't a club at that time, so we had to rent the room for like $60. And we promoted it. Who's Your Daddy? Evolution of Theories and Crises. Come see what's being censored in your science class. Guaranteed not to make a monkey out of you. And this is online. You can see this, and this is where I expose the lies of evolution. Because evolution is a lie. And you can't support a lie with truth. It has to be supported with more lies. And you can see, I show 3 or 4 video clips where this is, it's just secularist. But anyhow, that'll be worth your while. We did this one. Are you being brainwashed? That's the poster there. That was the one poster that somebody picked up and threw it. Is that promoting it in the free speech zone? Are you a mutated animal? He picked it up and threw it. And then a Muslim girl picked it up and gave it back to me. But there's a lot of stuff that's happening on campus. We began Creation Science 101, where we'd show a creation movie every week in their theater. And the tagline was, explore with open minds, not limited to theories of blind chance and random collisions of atoms. And we had these flyers all over campus. We print like 60 of them, all over the biology department, all over the science department. And so what they did a year or 2 later is they dry rocked all the bulletin boards. So I can't do that anymore. This one was Science Diversity Night. See what's excluded from class and think for yourself. And this talk I'm actually going to be giving at TCC at Twin Cities Creation Science. I'm giving this in June. And it might be Zoomed. That's what we're doing. We're not meeting in person. Science Uprising. Enjoy the freedom to think outside the intolerant dogma of evolution, of materialism. Okay? And so what can we do? You can start a creation club in town. Just pick a day, pick a Saturday, pick a night. Hey, we're getting together, showing a creation movie or whatever. I contacted a lot of movie producers, and there's a list of people, and you can get to this on my website. And I might have brought the brochures, I'm not sure if I did or not. But this is on my website, solidifyyourfaith.webs.com. There's a list of movie producers that says, if you're not charging money, go ahead and show our stuff. You don't need a license. All you need is a place to show a movie. Whether it's a business, a school, a church. We were showing ours in the public library at St. Cloud. It's like if the Benai Faith can get a room, I should be able to get a room. And I didn't ask permission, I just requested it, and I got it. And so, we got just a couple of minutes. I'm going to give you some Bible verses. By the word of God, were the heavens made, and all the host of them, by the breath of his mouth, he gathered the waters of the sea together as a heap, and he laid them in the depth in storehouses. Storehouses, sounds like the subterranean water chambers, right? And that's going to be Psalm 33. And this is Psalm 24. For he hath founded it upon the seas and established it upon the floods. Interesting. Or who shut up the sea with doors when it brake forth as if it had issued out of the womb? Job 38. And then we looked at Genesis 7:11. So with that, is there announcements, I believe? And then I'll be here for any questions if you have any.